What's up guys, Rui here and welcome back to the channel. Techwear, functional wear, whatever is it that you want to call it, is a fashion style that is notoriously known for being very expensive, especially when we start looking at some of the higher end stuff. Therefore, for the vast majority of us, we tend to look for cheaper alternative. However, due to the many misconceptions regarding this style, things can get a little bit more tricky. So in today's video, I'm hoping to be able to help you guys out that are on a budget, but instead of just giving you guys brand suggestions, I think it'll be much more beneficial if I were to actually show you guys how to approach it in a much better manner so that you're not bounded by the mentality of brands. And I'm aware that there are a lot of many different sub-styles within techwear. However, I will be focusing more on the utilitarian and kind of functional look, which I think many of us do gravitate towards too anyways. Disclaimer, fashion pretty much does not have any rules or regulation as to what you should or should not wear. However, I do believe that there is an efficient way in approaching this style from a financial standpoint. And before we continue to further into today's video, it would be very much appreciated if you could go ahead and hit the subscribe button down below if you are new to the channel or just haven't been subscribed yet, as it really does help the channel out a long way. Also, if you guys are feeling generous and want to help support the channel in a much bigger way, I do have a Patreon page whereby at its lowest tier, it is only $1 a month. And all of it will go into helping me to pick up new filming equipment so that I can continue to improve the qualities of the videos for y'all, as well as helping to keep the lights on this channel. Firstly, let's quickly address the elephant in the room. Why is techwear so expensive to begin with? Well, unlike most styles out there that mainly plays around with the cut, silhouette, and pattern, there is another layer of requirement for techwear, which is functionality. Now, functionality can come in many different shapes and forms, but oftentimes if you want a piece that covers all the various spectrum of garment functionality, be prepared to pay quite the extra because all these additional features do not come cheap, especially if we are looking at pieces that utilize high-end performance fabric and top-of-the-line hardware components. Putting design aside for now, these two factors alone significantly increases the raw material cost. In addition to that, you have to consider that the process of making these garments are not cheap as well. For example, to be able to sew waterproof garment is a very intricate and tedious process that requires pretty high craftsmanship. Not every factory has the right seamstress with the correct expertise to be able to execute it. Therefore, those that are able to will charge a much higher price. This is because unlike regular fabric, if there's a slight error during the sewing process, there's still the possibility of salvaging it, and it wouldn't really affect the usability of the piece. However, you don't have this luxury when you're dealing with waterproof fabric. The moment that there's an error in the sewing process, you kind of have to either start on a new piece of fabric or just continue on with the error on it. This is because once you remove the stitching, it sort of voids the waterproofness of the fabric, as there's now these needle holes where water could slowly start seeping in. Pair this out with the extensive R&D cost to ensure that the design of the clothes functions properly, you start to see why functional garments are usually much more expensive compared to regular clothes out there. With all that being said, I would be lying if I say that this probably justifies the very high price tag. Just like any piece that you get from any designer brands out there, you are still definitely paying a huge premium for the design and brand name. So how should we approach this style then if we are on a budget? As mentioned, because of the higher production cost for functional garments, a good quality piece will usually be much more expensive compared to most regular clothes out there. I emphasize this a lot because we have to understand at the end of the day, this is still a money-making business. And for budget or affordable pieces to exist, certain sacrifices has to be made in order to keep the cost of production down so that brands can still make a profit. So if something is too good to be true, chances are it probably is. When we are looking at functional garments, I would break it down into 3 different categories to look for, which are design, quality, and functionality. At the very top, the garment will have the higher standards in these categories, but they are incredibly expensive, and generally the lower the price point gets, the more you will need to decide which of these 3 would you prioritize more. For example, let's compare 2 parkas I own that are in very different price points and take a look at their differences. The first is this Goopy made Formula G mountain parka coming in at around $200 US. It's certainly not the most expensive techwear piece out there, but for the price, it is incredibly feature packed. It has all the essential things you would be looking for in a technical shell jacket, such as water and wind resistance, two-way front zippers, an inner lining for added comfort, and a ton of storage pockets. In addition to that, it also has a pretty intricate design with better articulation, asymmetrical patterns, and cool gimmicks. On the other hand, comparing it to this Uniqlo blotted parka, you really start to see the differences between pieces from various price points. At the time, the blotted parka cost me around $40 US, which is 5 times cheaper than the Goopy made jacket. It basically is a stripped down version offering only the bare essentials, but this is a good example of a piece that forgoes design and instead chooses to prioritize quality and functionality. Hence, when we're looking at more affordable options, it's really all about choosing which of these categories would you prioritize more. But in my opinion, if you truly are on a budget, I would advise you to focus more on quality and functionality over design, and be open to the idea of investing into the best pieces that your budget allows, even if it means that you're only able to pick up one piece at a time. Coming back to the Uniqlo blotted parka as an example, I believe this is the perfect starting piece for anyone that's into functional wear and is also on a budget. Yes, the design is pretty plain and basic, but at this price point, it's truly difficult to find a piece that could match its quality and features. Furthermore, plain and basic aren't necessarily bad from a design perspective, because it's essentially a canvas which you could build an outfit upon and continue improving it as you pick up more pieces. One of the most common mistakes that I see people tend to make is trying to stretch their budget as much as possible so that they can pick up multiple pieces while focusing too much on design, which results in them looking at places such as dropshipping sites. Now, inherently, if these are the types of clothes that you generally like, then by all means go for it. However, if you are picking them up with the intention of getting into techwear, then I would strongly urge you to look elsewhere. Now, as much as I've yet to purchase anything from these sites, it's pretty common sense to know that there's something incredibly sketchy with how cheap these pieces are. The main issue with a lot of these dropshipping pieces is in order to sell them at such a low price, while still offering all these designs, you most likely aren't going to get anything of quality, what more functionality. From what I've heard, most of these pieces either utilize very low quality materials, have incredibly poor construction, and worst of all, most of the design does not serve much purpose besides aesthetics, nor does it even fit or look as advertised. Therefore, if a piece doesn't even meet the prerequisite of a functional garment, can we even categorize it under techwear in the first place? And I guess this would always be a debate between those who just like it for the aesthetic and those who are true to the style. Another thing that I see a lot of people tend to make is focusing way too much on trying to find cheaper alternatives that look alike to the more expensive stuff. Now, this is extremely common when it comes to this utilitarian look, and we have to thank Acronym for this, for being the most sought after brand within this style. As a fashion content creator, I have to be very objective here, as I understand not many people can afford expensive clothes, and there are some who are just happy picking up these cheaper alternatives. In fact, I myself have reviewed and showcased various alternatives, as I'm aware not everyone is out here wanting to spend so much on clothes. This is completely fine. However, I believe there's also a large number of people who opt for these cheaper alternatives because they want that feeling of quick gratification, and this is where I'm kind of on the fence with it. Let's put all the talk about plagiarism and design copying out for a moment and just focus more on a consumerism standpoint. Let's say you finally decide to pick up the actual piece that you wanted this whole time. You now essentially have two very similar looking pieces in your closet, and chances are the cheaper alternative that you bought initially will completely lose all of its value because you now have the real deal. I remember reading a comment somewhere that said there will always be this lingering thought at the back of your head if you should have just bought the actual thing instead. And I do believe that this statement is very true. Instead, what you could have done is to just delay that feeling of gratification and slowly save up until you could actually afford the thing that you wanted all along. And trust me, the feeling of gratification that you get is far more fulfilling than you picking up multiple alternatives. I understand it can be quite intimidating to invest into such expensive pieces, especially when you're still experimenting with what you like. However, the way I look at it is if you do eventually move out of this style, you are able to sell back these pieces on the secondhand market, as most of them will still hold some value. Depending on the condition of the piece, brands like Acronym could easily still hold 70 to 80% of its original value, as compared to a lot of these drop shipping pieces whereby it completely loses all of its value the minute you purchase them. Furthermore, I think this will actually send a very strong message to brands to actually put in the effort and encourage them to continue innovating and putting out newer designs rather than just using back pre-existing things that are already out on the market. This not only shows the lack of creativity in a lot of brands, but it also makes the entire style incredibly boring and stale. If you do need to pick up something along the way, my advice is to go the opposite route. Find things that aren't meant to be temporarily replacements, but more towards being able to be incorporated alongside the piece that you want. By doing so, you are actually expanding your wardrobe, allowing you to have more pieces to play around with rather than just being direct replacements. Using myself as an example, if you guys have been following the channel for a while now, you would know the Acronym J28 GT has always been this super ultimate grill jacket for me, but it's something that's very out of reach at the moment. Hence, instead of picking up a look-alike piece to fill in that need of wanting the J28, I instead opted for this Goopy Mate mounted parka. Although functionally they are somewhat the same, it has a totally different design, and when the day comes when I'm able to finally pick up the J28, it's not going to be clashing with each other, and I now have more variety of jackets to rotate around. At the end of the day, like I always say, enjoy fashion the way you like it. But if you needed some help and guidance, hopefully you found this video useful. Nothing I say here is the golden rule, so feel free to pick and choose what you like and implement it into your own method. What are your thoughts on budget techwear and how do you go about approaching it? Do let your thoughts be known down below in the comment section and let's talk about it. If you did enjoy watching it, then please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And once again, if you guys are new to the channel or just haven't been subscribed yet, please do me a favor and hit the subscribe button down below, as it's these little things that really does help to push the channel out to more people. That's all I have for today's video. Please do stay safe out there, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace out.